An experienced diver once pointed out that diving isn't something you do, it's something you experience. There's something to that when you consider that underwater, seeing, hearing, moving and breathing differ from what you're used to on land. Let's start with how you see and hear as a diver. Water is more dense than air, and this affects light. Light changes direction slightly when it enters your mask from the water, which causes about a 1/3 magnification. Depending on your perspective, this can make an object look larger, or closer, or both, though with experience, you mentally adjust for this without thinking about it. Water also reflects, scatters, and absorbs light, so the deeper you go, the less light there is. But your eyes are very sensitive. At most popular sites, you have adequate light during the day. Although you may not notice much light loss in clear water during the day, you may notice color loss. Water doesn't absorb light uniformly. It absorbs some colors before others. As you see here, you lose red, followed by yellow, green, and finally blue. Your eyes adjust for the color change, though you may be surprised at how much lost color a dive light reveals. The underwater world isn't silent. You may hear aquatic organisms, boats, divers, and other noises. Sound travels longer distances in water than in air. A boat that's too far away to hear at the surface may sound close underwater. Sound also travels about 4 times faster in water, and that makes it difficult to tell its direction. Usually, something sounds like it's coming from all around or overhead. You may be able to tell relative changes in distance by whether a sound gets louder or fainter. Because water's denser than air, it takes more effort to move through it. The faster you swim, the more energy you use. But what's the rush? Save your energy by moving slowly and steadily, avoiding rapid or jerking movements. Streamlining is part of swimming and moving effectively. You're streamlined when all your gear's secure and nothing dangles, and when you swim relatively level. As you learned in Section 1, trim is your balance in the water, ideally set so your head and feet stay relatively level in a swimming position. If you have too much weight, you add air to your BCD to compensate. This puffs it out, lifts your torso, and lowers your feet, all of which add drag and waste your energy. If you don't have enough weight, your BCD may be empty, but you'll have to kick downward to stay at depth. This puts your feet too high. You can also be weighted correctly, but have it distributed too low or too high on your body. During your training dives, your instructor will help you master correct weighting and trim. The right weight and trim make water's density work for you. As you dive, you stay neutrally buoyant, almost weightless, gliding through the underwater world. At the surface, you inflate your BCD so you float effortlessly. It's your ability to change your buoyancy that makes diving a unique experience. Normally, you'll end the dive when you're too cool for comfort, but be aware that water absorbs heat about 20 times faster than air does, so even water as warm as 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit, can chill you after a while. To stay comfortable, you wear an exposure suit. A full wetsuit like this for moderately cool to moderately warm water, and a short wetsuit like this for tropical water. Use a dry suit in the coolest water. You'll learn more detail about exposure suits in a bit. Diving's not fun if you're cold, so if you get cold, end the dive and wear more protection the next time. Except in very warm water, even with an exposure suit, you'll still lose heat. The longer the dive, the more protection you wear, but even then, you'll eventually get chilled. Normally, you'll end the dive when you're too cool for comfort, but be aware that uncontrollable shivering is a sign of hypothermia. a serious condition in which your body has lost so much heat that it can be dangerous. If you begin to shiver continuously, exit the water immediately, dry off, and seek warmth. You've already learned that you breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously while diving. This is a more effective way to breathe dense air, and it reduces the effect of dead air space. Dead air space is the air in your breathing passages that doesn't reach your lungs. It's the first part of each inhalation and is higher in waste carbon dioxide. Dive gear adds dead air space. Slow, deep breaths make breathing more efficient because they reduce the proportion of dead air you inhale. It also helps you stay relaxed and clear-headed. Airway control is how you breathe past a little bit of water in the mouthpiece, which is common after clearing. The technique is to inhale slowly while looking downward. Since it's heavier than air, water stays in the mouthpiece as the air flows into your mouth and lungs. Put your tongue tip against the roof of your mouth to help deflect any water. After you get a breath, exhale sharply to clear the residual water. If a few droplets get on your throat, just cough while holding your snorkel or regulator in place. Overexertion usually results from prolonged exertion, like fighting a current, so you can start breathing faster than your regulator can deliver air. It can be frightening and may cause panic. Signs and symptoms include fatigue, labored breathing, feeling suffocated or air-starved, weakness, anxiety, headache, muscle cramping, and a tendency to panic. You help prevent overexertion by breathing slowly and deeply. If your breathing starts to rise, slow down. If you start to feel overexerted, stop all activity, signal your body, and rest. At the surface, make yourself buoyant. Underwater, hang on to something if you can, such as a rock or a dead coral. Wait until your breathing returns to normal before continuing at a slower, proper pace. If conditions make that difficult, abort the dive. Remember that when scuba diving, your breathing goal is to always breathe slowly, deeply, and continuously. As you've learned, you make and plan dives with a buddy. Dive plans don't have to be complex or lengthy, but they help you enjoy the dive more and prepare you to handle problems. Among other points specific to the dive as appropriate, a plan addresses entry and exit points and methods, the course you will follow, the maximum depth and time, a review of signals and communications, when to head back, usually based on your time or air supply, how you will stay together, what to do if separated from your buddy, emergency procedures, and your objective. You kit up together, helping each other as appropriate. Then, right before going in, you conduct the pre-dive safety check with the recall phrase, "Begin with review and friend," or any other phrase for BRAF. Begin, B for BCD. Check adjustment, operation, and partial inflation. Make sure the cylinder band is snug. Check that your surface signaling devices are in place. Width, W for weights. Confirm correct weight amount and distribution, and that you can quick release and discard enough to float. Review, R for releases. Make sure all buckles and straps are secured and properly adjusted, and that buddies know how to work each other's releases. And A for air. Test breathe your regulator and alternate air source. Check your SPG to be sure you have enough air for the dive, plus a reserve. Buddies make sure they know where to find each other's alternate air sources. Friend, F for final check. Look each other over for loose straps, trapped hoses, anything out of sorts. Make the pre-dive safety check a habit. It only takes a moment, yet may help prevent close calls and accidents. During the dive, stay with your buddy or buddies. Remember that in clear water, you can be too far apart and yet still see each other. Know what you'll do if you get separated. The general procedure is to look for no more than a minute, then reunite on the surface if you haven't found each other. But in some circumstances, you may need to plan something different. When you have a 3-person team, you follow these procedures if any one buddy gets separated, even though 2 of you are still together. The buddy system works well when divers plan their dives together, pre-dive check together, stay together, and manage their air together. Remember, it's your responsibility to stay with your buddy or buddies. No one can do it for you. Managing your air supply is one of the most important dive skills. You've already learned about using your SPG. Now let's look at how you and your buddies manage your supplies together. People use air at different rates, so one buddy will always use air fastest. Throughout the dive, you and your buddies share air supply information because you turn the dive and head back based on the diver who reaches your planned turn pressure, the pressure at which you head back, first. Suppose you and a buddy dive from a boat with similar cylinders, full at 200 bar or 3000 psi. You agree on a 50 bar or 500 psi reserve. You also agree on 20 bar or 300 psi to cover your ascent and safety stop. Put that with your reserve to get the pressure at which you should be starting your ascent. In this case, you want to start ascending the boat mooring line with at least 70 bar or 800 psi remaining. Take 70 bar or 800 psi from your starting pressure, and that means you have 130 bar or 2200 psi for the dive itself, and you agree to head out until one of you has used half of this, 65 bar or 1100 psi. Then you'll head back using the other half. So, to find your turn pressure, the SPG pressure at which you turn around and head back, subtract 65 bar or 1100 psi from your starting pressure. In this case, your turn pressure is 135 bar or 1900 psi. This gets you back to the mooring line and back on the surface with your reserve. When you plan conservatively, it's common to reach your ascent point with more air than planned. If so, you can often continue the dive in the immediate area, then surface when you reach your ascent pressure. With conservative planning, unexpected delays will still usually let you reach your ascent point within your air supply limits. But if not, ascend as planned where you are and swim the rest of the way on the surface. Do not risk running out of air underwater. A final point. To adjust for differences in air supplies and starting pressures, plan air management based on the smallest supply. At the beginning and end of a dive, you commonly spend time at the surface in water too deep in which to stand. As you've learned, maintain a habit of keeping your mask on and breathing from your snorkel or regulator. Under stress, you tend to do what you do by habit, so these are the habits you want. You may prevent and handle difficulties more effectively when you can see and breathe with your face in the water. You respond much more slowly if you have to put your mask back on. With your mask on and a mouthpiece in place, you're less likely to be blinded or choked a bit by waves. And you're less likely to lose a mask that's on your face. Talk as necessary, but put your mouthpiece back in your mouth afterwards. If you're at the surface more than a few moments at the start of a dive, use your snorkel to save your air for the dive. At the end of a dive with a low cylinder, you may need your snorkel to breathe with your face in the water while swimming or in choppy conditions. When you have to get in the water some distance from where you want to dive, it's common to save air by using your snorkel on the surface to get there. You may snorkel as you look for your descent point from the surface. If you surface away from your exit point due to low air, you may have no choice but to make a surface swim. For short swims, or so you can see underwater, swim face down. But for long swims, it's less tiring on your back because the water supports the cylinder weight, though it's a little harder to navigate and watch where you're going. Maintain the buddy system. Communicate and stay together. Generally, it works well to swim side by side, like this. When you're ready to descend, you follow 5 steps. First, confirm your buddy is ready to descend. Then second, orient yourselves to something at the surface or underwater. Third, switch to your regulator. And fourth, check your computer to be sure it's operational and hasn't gone into sleep mode. Activate your timer if you're using one. Fifth, signal descent and slowly deflate your BCD to start down together. As you start down, begin equalizing immediately and equalize frequently, every meter or few feet, as you learned previously. Descend with your head above your feet, like this, to help your orientation and equalization. You often have a line or slope as a reference. Usually, you use it as a visual reference and control your descent by controlling your buoyancy. But you may hold on to it in some circumstances, like diving in a current. When descending without a reference, stay in a buddy team, adjust your buoyancy, and control your descent by watching your computer. As you descend, your buoyancy decreases and you start to sink faster. This is because increased pressure compresses the gas in your exposure suit and it loses buoyancy. Add air to your BCD to compensate for this, or to your dry suit if you're wearing one. Use small, frequent adjustments for a slow, controlled descent. This helps you equalize every meter or few feet. Ideally, you arrive at the bottom neutrally buoyant by adjusting as you descend. Starting an ascent also has 5 steps. 1. Confirm your buddy is ready to ascend. 2. Check your computer to be sure you're within its limits. 3. Look up and hold your BCD deflator. Do not add air to your BCD. If you're properly weighted and neutrally buoyant, start your ascent by swimming up gently. 4. Ascend slowly, no faster than 18 meters or 60 feet per minute, or your computer's rate, whichever is slower. With most computers, your ascent rate is 10 meters or 30 feet per minute. Look up and turn as you ascend to make sure there's nothing above you. Reach up as you near and break through the surface. Check your computer and control your buoyancy to control your ascent rate. Your buoyancy increases as you ascend because air in your BCD and exposure suit expands. Control your buoyancy by releasing air from your BCD or dry suit if you're wearing one, in small amounts frequently. When possible, ascend with your buddy or buddies along a reference, like a sloping bottom, mooring line, or a vertical line from a boat or float. Again, you normally use it as a visual reference, though you may ascend holding onto a line in situations like currents. You can ascend in mid-water without a reference by controlling your buoyancy and watching your depth and descent rate on your computer. To navigate while doing this, a common technique is for one buddy to control the ascent while another buddy focuses on navigation. Make a safety stop a normal part of your ascents. It's simply a pause somewhere between 6 meters or 20 feet and 3 meters or 10 feet, usually at 5 meters or 15 feet, for 3 to 5 minutes. Safety stops help you stabilize your ascent and give your body extra time to release dissolved gases. This helps reduce the risk of lung overexpansion injuries and decompression sickness. You'll learn more about this in sections 4 and 5. It's easiest to make safety stops with a reference, but you can make them without one by watching your depth on your computer while hovering, neutrally buoyant. Note that safety stops add conservatism, but you omit them during emergencies like assisting another diver or if you are very low on air. After all divers confirm they've completed their safety stop, swim gently upward to resume your ascent. Look up and reach up, like this, and rotate if necessary to check for obstructions. Keep a hand up as you surface, then inflate your BCD so you float comfortably before you switch to your snorkel. When boat diving, you usually signal the dive master that you're okay, then swim toward the boat if you're some distance away. You wear exposure suits for warmth and to provide some protection from accidental stings, scrapes and cuts. The three primary types are wetsuits, dry suits and skin suits, which are sometimes called bodysuits. You use wetsuits in water as cold as 10 degrees Celsius or 50 degrees Fahrenheit to 30 degrees Celsius or 86 degrees Fahrenheit. They're made of foam neoprene. Water seeps into the suit and gets trapped, which is why they're called wetsuits. Afterward, your body heats the water, and the neoprene slows further heat loss significantly. A wetsuit has to fit properly, because if it's too loose, water flows in and out, taking away body heat. Too tight, and it's not comfortable. So, be sure to get a professional fitting. Dry suits cover most or all of your body, and you use them in water cooler than 18 degrees Celsius or 65 degrees Fahrenheit, but also for very long dives in warmer water. As the name says, the suit keeps you dry. An undergarment and an air layer, and sometimes the suit itself, insulate you. Because a dry suit is an airspace, you equalize it and adjust it for buoyancy control when you change depths. You learn to do this in the Padi Dry Suit Diver course, and your instructor will familiarize you with dry suit operation if you use one in this course. Dry suits don't fit snugly, but size, fit and options are still important. Skin suits provide some sting, cut, scrape and sunburn protection, but little or no insulation. You wear them by themselves in very warm water, or under a partial wetsuit in moderately warm water. Many divers wear skin suits to help them put on wetsuits. Exposure suits come in different styles, and you can choose from different accessories and options. Wet and dry suits insulate you so effectively that overheating can be an issue when it's hot out. Avoid this by setting up your kit before putting on your suit, and put the suit on at the last possible moment. Stay in the shade if possible. Limit activity as much as you can, especially when you have to be in the sun. Pull back a hood and unzip the jacket for as long as possible. If you do start to overheat, stop and cool off, even if it holds up the dive a few minutes. You carry a cutting tool for safety, such as to deal with entanglement, and for convenience, such as to remove litter from a dive site. You can choose from 4 basic types, though some areas regulate the types and sizes of cutting devices. Dive knives range in size and usually have a smooth and serrated cutting edge. Dive tools are similar, but they replace the pointed tip with a prying tip. Shears are especially suited to cutting line and net. And Z-knives are bladed hooks specifically for cutting fishing net or line. You usually carry a Z-knife in addition to a regular knife or tool. You mount cutting tools in different places based on what you like, as shown. Wear at least one someplace you can reach it with either hand, so it's accessible even if you have an arm a bit tangled in something. You need a dive gear bag to carry all your equipment, except weights, cylinders and dry suits. They're designed specifically for diving so that salt water won't ruin zippers, so the material won't rot, and so they can withstand the stresses carrying it. You can choose from many styles, options and colors, which are mainly personal preference. The main thing to pay attention to is size. Select a bag that is slightly larger than what you think you will need, because your kit tends to grow as you gain experience. As a diver, there are 3 primary instruments you use: your SPG, dive computer, and compass. These may be separate instruments, or 2 or all 3 may integrate into a single one. You're already familiar with SPGs. Dive computers track your depth, time, and give you time limits. You'll learn about these in sections 4 and 5. Your compass gives directional information so you can find your way. You'll learn about doing this a bit later as well. Besides these, there are optional instruments. Before dive computers, divers use depth gauges and watches for use with dive tables. You will need these if you use the RDP table or ERDPML instead of a computer. Dive watches are popular lifestyle accessories, the badge of a diver, if you will. Many divers who have computers also have dive watches for that reason, as well as having another way to time their dives. Thermometers help you learn how much exposure protection to use. Although you can get a separate thermometer, your SPG or dive computer may already have one. Dive instruments are robust, but shield them from impact and don't drop them. Keep them out of prolonged exposure to direct sunlight and high heat. Other than rinsing instruments, the primary special care is changing the batteries as directed by the manufacturer. See the manufacturer literature for any additional requirements. You'll learn several ways to enter the water during this course. Depending upon your physical characteristics, one you may learn is the giant stride, which is popular when diving from large dive boats or from docks onto deep water. After your pre-dive safety check, with your buddy, go to the water entry area. To avoid walking with fins on, put on your fins there if you can. You can stabilize each other or hang on to something stable. Partially inflate your BCD. Check that the entry area is clear and confirm that your buddy's ready. Breathe from your regulator and hold it and your mask like this, so they don't get bumped out of place when you splash. You can hold your instruments and accessories with the other hand. However, some divers prefer to put it on the back of their head. Look straight ahead and take a big step into the water. Keep holding your mask and regulator until you're stable on the surface. Turn to the boat or dock, poolside in this case. Signal that you're okay and clear the area for your buddy. Boat diving, you typically wait on a line trailing from near the ladder or the stern if there's a bit of a current. You use a weight check at the surface to determine proper weighting. Starting with your estimated weight, breathe from your regulator and deflate your BCD completely. Holding a normal breath, you should float at eye level. And when you exhale, you should sink slowly. If not, add or remove weight until you do. Once you're there, if you're wearing a full cylinder, add about 2 kilograms or 5 pounds. This is because the air in your cylinder has weight, and you get lighter as you use it up. The 2 kilograms or 5 pounds offsets this weight change. Sometimes a BCD band is too loose and the cylinder starts to slip. If this happens before getting into the water, it's usually simplest to take the scuba kit off and readjust it. If a cylinder comes loose during the dive, it's not usually an emergency because it will stay with the diver. Find some sand or other insensitive bottom and have her turn face down, like this. Loosen the band enough to replace the cylinder. Then tighten and lock it. If it comes loose at the surface, you may be able to re-secure it by having the diver hold on to something while breathing from her snorkel or regulator. It's usually easiest if the diver has no more air in the BCD than necessary to float. If a cylinder slips loose while exiting the water, it is often easiest to ease back into the water, slip the kit off, and then lift it from the water like this. You'll practice taking your gear off in the water at the surface so you can do this. When your snorkel's out of your mouth at the surface, it fills with water. To clear it so you can breathe, blow forcefully like this to blast the water out. You'll hear this called the blast method. After clearing, inhale cautiously and use airway control to breathe past any residual water and blast again to get rid of it. Practice this with your face in the water, which is how you do it when you're keeping an eye on something below, or when in choppy waves that, for practical purposes, mean that your face is always in the water. You switch from your snorkel to your regulator, and your regulator to your snorkel on almost every dive. Again, practice this with your face in the water. Starting with your snorkel, take a breath, then exchange it for your regulator. Clear your regulator. After a few breaths, take a breath, go back to your snorkel, clear it, and breathe. Repeat this exchange until you can do it effortlessly. During confined water dive 2, you'll begin developing your neutral buoyancy skills. One popular technique for starting out is the fin pivot. Lie face down on insensitive bottom, sand for example, if you're not in a pool. Relax, then breathe slowly and deeply. If you're approximately neutrally buoyant, you should pivot up on your fin tips as you inhale and down as you exhale. If you don't, add a small burst to your BCD and try again. Make small changes. Adding a lot of air risks a rapid ascent. Be patient. When you pivot up and down as you breathe, like this, you're about neutral. Once you know how to do this, start using neutral buoyancy as your normal state while diving. For example, if you need to clear your mask, instead of kneeling, clear it in mid-water or with just light fin tip contact, in a more horizontal position, like this. Although the fin pivot is popular, your instructor may have you use a different technique. Confined Water Dive 2 continues your mask clearing skills. You'll start by clearing a fully flooded mask, which you do just like a partially flooded one, like this. Then, you take off your mask completely. This prepares you in case it were to get dislodged completely while diving. If you're not wearing contacts, keep your eyes open. Everything will be blurry, but you'll see well enough to swim, signal your buddy, and so on. If you find it uncomfortable to breathe with your nose exposed to water at first, block it momentarily if necessary. But with a little practice, you'll be able to breathe without a mask and without blocking it. You'll practice doing this for a minute or more, which is about how long it would take to reach the surface if you lost your mask and couldn't find it. After a minute, put it back on and clear it. Then, check the seal for trapped hair or your hood under it, which would allow an annoying drizzle until corrected. A rare but possible malfunction is for your BCD or dry suit inflator to stick open. Respond by disconnecting it and venting the excess air. To start the exercise, your instructor may simulate the sticking by holding down the inflation button. Immediately disconnect the hose from the inflator, like this. It takes more effort with your regulator pressurized. Push the hose toward the connection, like this, while pulling back on the release fitting with your fingers. If you can't disconnect quickly, get relatively vertical and hold open the exhaust, like this, so you can keep your buoyancy under control while continuing to disconnect the hose. After you're finished practicing, be sure to reconnect the inflator hose. During Confined Water Dive 3, you'll learn to inflate your BCD without low-pressure inflation from your cylinder. You're better able to respond appropriately if you know what it feels like to run out of air. Your instructor will simulate this by closing your cylinder valve while you breathe and watch your SPG. Note that the pressure drops with each breath, and you'll feel breathing become noticeably difficult. When you can't get a breath, signal out of air, and your instructor will reopen your valve. You'll see your SPG return to its previous reading, and you can resume breathing. Good divers know their approximate remaining air at all times. To help you develop this ability, at times your instructor will, without prior notice, ask you to signal your air pressure without rechecking your SPG, after which you'll check together. If you're managing your air supply and monitoring your SPG as you should be within 20 bar or 300 psi. One of the exits you may learn is the ladder exit. This is a common technique when diving from larger boats. Surface near but not too close to the ladder area. If there's another diver ahead of you, don't get right under her. The diver could fall back in, or her cylinder could slip loose. If there's a current, you usually have a line to hang on to until it's your turn. When it is, approach the ladder and grab it firmly. Keep your mask on so you can see above and below the surface, and switch back to your regulator so you can breathe if you were to fall back in. Then, while keeping contact with the ladder, hand up any accessories, then remove and hand up your fins. Some divers slip adjustable fins onto their wrists, like this, so they have them to swim with if they lose their grip and get pushed away by the current. Breathe from your regulator until you're all the way aboard, and immediately take a seat and have a buddy help you get your gear off. Depending upon the boat, the ladder, surface conditions, and your physical characteristics, you may hand up your weights or your entire scuba kit before climbing the ladder. Some divers can't climb ladders at all and use different exit techniques.